to a memory and not embracing who they've become, not embracing the changes, not embracing the beauty of who God is transforming them and who God is growing them to be. In fact, truth is, like, hey, I love girlfriend version of Holly. I love honeymoon version of Holly, but I wouldn't trade that version of Holly for today's version of Holly. A mom version of Holly, wife version of Holly. I wouldn't trade that in the world, for the world. And so, again, you got to understand that, listen, people change, and that's not a bad thing. It's actually something to be embraced rather than running from. And here's the second thing, again, of expectations that you can take to the bank, is that you will have to work on it more than you planned. You will have to work on it more than you planned. Verse 27 through 30 says, finish this daughter's bridal week. Then we will give you the younger one also. So this is after, he wakes up to Leah, and this is Laban talking. He says, hey, finish the daughter's bridal week. Then we will give you the younger one also in return for another 7 years of work. And I like verse 30. It says, and he worked for Laban, get this, another 7 years. See, going into the marriage, he knew that it was going to require some work. He knew it was going to require a little bit of effort. He knew it was going to be it was going to take him out of his comfort zone. He was going to have to, he was going to have to pick up his clothes every once in a while. He was going to have to hand laundry duty every once in a while. I mean, he knew that. And truth is, nobody comes into a marriage or a relationship and doesn't think that there's some work involved. I mean, I think everyone gets that there's a little bit of work involved. But the problem is I think way too often we grossly underestimate the amount of work involved. We grossly underestimate the amount of work involved. And listen, if you want the kind of marriage where you're married to the hot one, the Rachel one, if you want the marriage that you expected in your mind, the one you drew in your mind, listen, you're going to have to put some work into it. It doesn't just happen. And in fact, I like this picture because, again, he worked 7 years, and then he signed up for another 7. In other words, listen, he didn't just put work to get his spouse, to attract his spouse. He had to put work into keeping his spouse. Yeah, and listen, the same goes for us. If we want a marriage that's growing, a marriage that's vibrant, it's going to take some work. It's going to take some effort. And maybe sit there and think, well, this isn't how I planned it to go. This isn't what I was expecting. Again, I thought I married Fabio. I woke up to Ed. And again, there's some of these unmet expectations. But I put it on my notes this way, and I think this is so true, is that oftentimes when it doesn't work out exactly how you planned it would, when it doesn't work out is exactly when you need to put work in. When it doesn't work out, when it's not necessarily going the way you expected or you thought, that's actually the time that you and we need to put the most work in. Jacob committed to work 7 more years. And get this, too, because I get the pushback like, well, you don't know, you don't understand the strain, you don't understand the argument, you don't understand the hurt in our relationship and in our marriage. But I find it interesting when Jacob makes his commitments. Because, again, this is after the letdown. This is after the disappointment. This is after, Rachel, the love of his life, it seemed like she was almost in cahoots with her dad to pull this off. And even in spite of that pain, in spite of that hurt, in spite of that wound, Jacob, get this, recommits himself for another 7 years, even after the disappointment. Even after the disappointment. And listen, to me, again, that's amazing to me. Because listen, look, anyone can commit for the first 7 years. Anyone can sign up, when there's the feelings, when there's the emotion, when there's the romance, when it feels like a scene from The Bachelor. Anyone can do that. But you know what marriage is all about? Marriage is committing to the second 7. Marriage is saying that, listen, hey, even when it gets rough, even when it gets hard, I'm committing to love you, for not just the first 7, not when it's all great, not when it's all roses, but even when times get tough and times get hard. Marriage is committing to the second 7 years. And listen, hopefully you understand too, when I'm saying 7, I'm not speaking specifically 7 years. Like some of you are like, oh, well, I only got 7 more years. I think I can hold out till then, No, that's not what I'm saying. In fact, that word, 7, that number, numbers, they have value in the Bible. And the number 7 actually means completeness. It means totality. It means going all in. It's going to the finish. And especially, and I love, again, that commitment to another 7 years. I don't know if you've ever heard that term, 7-year itch. And, oftentimes, kind of a lot of different sociological studies have kind of shown that oftentimes there's a higher rate of divorce, higher rate of breakup after 7 years. Because I think after 7 years is when you really get to know a person. Like after 7 years, the gloss, the shine, the glow, like it's no longer Rachel, it's Leah. You see the real person, the good, the bad, the ugly. And again, marriage again is not simply a commitment for the first 7. It's a commitment say, hey, listen, I'm going to knowing the good, the bad, the ugly of you, everything in your life. I'm committing for another 7 years. I'm committing to the end. And don't get me wrong here too. I'm not saying if you're in an abusive relationship that this is just got to tough it out. I'm not saying that at all. I mean, if you're in a relationship that's abusive or hurtful in that kind of capacity, I mean, you need to get out of that. That's not what I'm saying here. But what I am saying is that, listen, I think too often we live in a society where when things get tough and things don't live up to our expectations and things don't live up to our picture of how we thought it was going to go, when things start to get a little bit rough, it's amazing how many people decide to throw in the towel and give up way too soon. And listen, I'm telling you, marriage is a commitment to serve the second 7, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's tough, even when the person maybe disappoints you. And listen, if you're married, your spouse is going to disappoint you sometimes. And in fact, Jesus, actually, in speaking of this and speaking of the importance of this, he's some of the religious leaders, they come and they ask him and they talk to him and they say, what's the limit, basically, Jesus? Like when it comes to just someone saying something wrong or doing something that hurts me or wounds me, when can I throw in the towel? When can I call it enough is enough? And they go, is 7 times enough? And I love Jesus' answer. No, it's 7 times 70. 7 times 70. In other words, no, you've got to do a second 7 and a third 7 and a fourth 7 and a 70th 7. That's what marriage is. It's a commitment. It's a covenant. And again, I get the pushback. It's like, well, you don't understand. I mean, they disappointed me. They hurt me. Look. If you're married, there's going to be times where your spouse they disappoint you. But listen, just because they disappoint you, it doesn't necessarily make your spouse a bad spouse. You're probably disappointed because you're married to a human being. And again, human beings, we're going to do those things. We're going to say some things sometimes that hurt one another, do some things that hurt one another, sometimes intentionally, sometimes not. But you're going to be disappointed. And the real question is, what are you going to do then? What are you going to do then? Jacob, he chose a second 7. He chose a second 7. He chose to go the distance. Which leads to the third, unmet expectation, or expectation, I guess I should say, actually, that you can count on being met, is that your spouse will never give you everything you need. Your spouse will never give you everything you need. We see this in Genesis 31. It says, when Rachel saw that she was not bearing Jacob any children, she became jealous of her sister. So she said to Jacob, give me children or I'll die. Talk about a little bit of pressure. Like Jacob, I've got this issue. I've got this need inside me that you're not fulfilling. And I need you to take care of this. I need you to make me happy. I need you to bring me some joy. I need you to bring me some satisfaction. I need you to bring me some fulfillment. Which leads to the fourth expectation that you can count on in marriage, is that your spouse will always need more than you can give. Your spouse will always need more than you can give. I know some combination, right? You need some stuff, and they'll never be able to give it to you, and they need stuff, and they expect stuff from you that you can never give to them. And we see this in Genesis 32. Jacob became angry about this. He was frustrated about this. He goes on and says, am I in the place of God who has kept you from having children? And so we see this tension. We see this frustration. We see this realization, both longing for something that the other person could never fulfill, and actually was never meant to fulfill. And unfortunately, by the way, I think we live in a time and an age where so many people, we get stuck right here. In fact, this is actually the root of so many divorces, is again trying to get from somebody else, trying to get from another person a fulfillment and a satisfaction, a happiness, a joy that they were never meant to deliver in the first place. Which leads actually to kind of the last point. And this is where the story starts to turn. Because, it could have just ended in catastrophe. It could have just ended in divorce. It could have just stopped right there. But Rachel... Rachel takes it another route. In fact, I like what she does. In Genesis 30:22, it says, then God remembered Rachel. He listened to her. In other words, Rachel, she was talking with God. She was interacting with God. She quit talking to Jacob, and she started to talk to God about her lack of fulfillment, her lack of joy, her lack of satisfaction. And so it says God listened to her and enabled her to conceive. In other words, again, for most of her time, she was just constantly talking with Jacob, constantly nagging Jacob, like, Jacob, I need this from you. You've got to do this for me. I need you to meet this expectation. But the turning point happens when she shifts her focus on trying to get something from Jacob that Jacob could never give to her, and started to focus on the only one who really could. Started to shift her focus, shift her conversation onto God. Genesis 30, verse 23 says it this way. It says, she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. And I love this. It says, God has taken away my disgrace. God has taken away my disgrace, which leads to the last expectation. Listen, you can take to the bank. And this is that you will need God's grace to make it through. You will need God's grace to make it through. If you're going to do this thing, again, first 7, you can do on your own. First 7, when you're dating, the honeymoon years, listen, love, pheromones, episodes of The Bachelor, it can get you through. But if you hope to really live out the marriage covenant, to sign up for a second 7, listen, you can't do that on your own. That only happens with some supernatural help. That only happens by the grace of God. If you're going to love somebody, not when you don't know them, but when you all the way know them, the good, the bad, the ugly, the struggles, the challenges, you know all about them, which, by the way, is God's love for us. I mean, you realize that when God came down, when Jesus went to the cross, it wasn't like he didn't know what he was signing up for. It's not like he got down here like, whoa, wait, I didn't sign up for this deal. I didn't know they had that going on. No, it wasn't that at all. He knew everything about us. The Bible says, while we were still sinners, Christ Jesus came and died for us. See, it's a picture of his love for you and for me. And listen, if you're going to sign up for a second 7, you can't do it on your own. You need that kind of grace. You need that kind of supernatural help. Again, I love what she says in verse 23. She says, God has taken away my disgrace. In other words, God did it. God has done this. I couldn't do this by myself. My spouse couldn't do this for me. I couldn't do this for him. God did it. I'd been asking Jacob for some stuff that Jacob could never do for me. I'd been putting expectations on my spouse that they could never live up to, because there's some things that, listen, only God can do. In fact, I put in my notes this way, is that there are some expectations that only God can meet. There's some expectations that only God can meet. And listen, the faster you get that, the faster you really hold on to that and you understand that, I'm telling you, the happier you'll be, the more fulfilled you'll be, the more joy you'll find in your life, in your marriage, in your relationships. The moment that we quit looking on, hey, she's going to make me happy, or they're going to meet all my needs, or they're going to satisfy me, or they're going to completely, no. There are some things that only God can do. There's a joy, there's a fulfillment, there's a satisfaction that, listen, only God can pour into you and me. That's found only in a relationship with him. See, I think the problem is not with our expectations or with your expectation. The problem is with the location of your expectation. So the problem is not with your expectation. The problem is with the location of your expectation. But listen, think about this. What if the point of your disappointment, and listen, what if the point of the disappointment what was to point you to the one who never disappoints? What if the point of that letdown, of that moment where you realize, hey, I thought I married Rachel, I woke up to Leah, I thought I married Fabio, I woke up to Ed, and that moment of unmet expectations, what if that was meant to actually push you to the real source of happiness, to the real source of joy? What if the point of marriage wasn't just about making me happy, but was to help me realize how much I need God? What if the disappointment was meant to help you realize that only God can be that for you? I'm telling you, it changes everything. So I want to wrap up with this. I'm going to invite Chris up to kind of start to close this out. But there's one more section in this story that I think is pertinent to this. And it's interesting. After all this, she realizes, she'd been trying to get her fulfillment, trying to get her satisfaction from Jacob, from this marriage, from this relationship, from trying to, live out all these different expectations and dreams, and only to kind of have those keep falling short. And she finds this fulfillment. She finds this satisfaction in God. And it's interesting because later on at the end of Genesis 30, it gets to a point where she names her son Joseph. Now, that's really interesting here because most of the time when someone gets named something in the Bible, it's descriptive of kind of who they are. Kind of like Leah. Leah wasn't like the most attractive in there, and so her name was kind of descriptive of kind of how they had seen her. Well, the same thing typically goes with this, but this name is different though. See, this name that she applies to their son isn't descriptive of the person. It's actually descriptive of God. She names her son, get this, Joseph, which in Hebrew means Yahweh will add to it. Yahweh will add to it. In other words, God took my pain away. That's the statement. And here's his name. He's not done yet. I love that. I mean, you get that. Basically, that's what she's saying. He's not done yet. I couldn't have children, but now I just had a baby boy, and I'm so grateful for what God has done. He's brought us through the hardest thing we could have ever imagined, the hardest season we could have ever thought we would go through. And yet God was there. And so his name is God is just getting started. Listen, Yahweh will add to it. God's not done yet. God's just beginning to do a work on our marriage, in our life, in our church, in our place. Listen, I don't know what the situation looks like, but you've got to get to a place where at some point you can declare, you can prophesy Joseph over your marriage. Joseph over your future, Joseph over your career, Joseph over your dreams. Maybe you've been divorced and you need to declare that God's not done yet with me, right? Listen, you got to get to that place where we shift our focus of trying to get everybody around us to try to meet some need that they were never meant to meet in the first place. Only God was meant to meet that. And get to that place where, again, we're able to proclaim Joseph over our lives. Maybe you've walked through some difficulty and you need to be able to have the faith to look forward and say, God isn't finished yet with me. What he brought me from is not where I'm going. God is still at work. He's going to add to it. He's going to keep working. It's not over yet. He's just getting started. See, this isn't about lowering your expectations when it comes to marriage. Lowering your expectations when it comes to a relationship, lowering your expectations when it comes to life or career or dream. It's actually just the opposite. It's about raising it from just settling for mediocre to miraculous. It's about raising the level of your expectations so high that it can only be met if God gets involved. In fact, I put in my notes this way. You and I, we've got to raise your expectations for your marriage until the only way it can meet them is if God is in the middle of it. See, you should expect a marriage so miraculous that doesn't make sense unless God steps into it. You should have expectations so high that good and well, he can't do that for us. I can't do that for us. Only God could do this for us. We've got to raise our expectations. We've got to move from grading expectations to a great expectation that's found only when we get God involved and we look to God as the source of our fulfillment, our strength, our joy, our help in whatever situation you're in. Whether it be marital, whether it be relationship, whether it be career, whether it be with a dream. Every head bowed, every eye closed. I want to pray for you